Okay, let's get into the last chapter of the class, chapter number 15, psychological disorders. So this will get into the classification of psychological disorders and kind of the breakdown of what each of them mean. So first, psychopathology is kind of the term for psychological disorders, also known as abnormal psychology. So if you take the course abnormal psychology in college or further on, it'll be about all of the psychological disorders that are out there in the DSM-5, which we'll get into what the DSM-5 is later. So yes, abnormal psychology, psychopathology is a scientific study of mental/psychological disorders. Well, mental disorders, also known as psychological disorders, but the DSM-5 favors the term mental disorder, are clinically significant disturbances in a person's thoughts, emotions, or behaviors that reflects dysfunction in mental functioning. The key word is dysfunction. People can have disturbances in their thoughts, emotions, or behaviors kind of as a one-off thing because of response to some type of event. But it's when it becomes dysfunctional to their lives is really when it becomes a disorder. And then the last thing for you to know before we really get into it is comorbidity. Comorbidity is a condition where a person is diagnosed with two or more psychological disorders, and that happens very often. So what I want to let you know, what is not a mental disorder. So we just said what mental disorders are. I want you to know things that are not mental disorders. One, an acceptable or culturally approved response to a common stressor, such as death of a loved one. We all process things differently, and as long as it's not dysfunction, as long as it's an acceptable or culturally acceptable response to that stressor, it's not a disorder. And then number two, socially deviant behavior and conflicts between an individual and society, unless these behaviors result in dysfunction. Okay, so here's kind of the 4 Ds of psychological disorders. We have distress, that could be suffering, pain, anguish, dysfunction. This interferes with daily functioning. Okay, that's what makes something, especially what makes something a disorder. Deviant, so different from the social/cultural norms of society. And then lastly, danger, concern about the threat of self-harm or suicide or aggression or homicide. So over 26% of adult Americans were diagnosed with a psychological disorder in the last year. That's over 1 in 4. If you think of, how many people are enrolled in this class, odds are, several people were diagnosed with a psychological disorder in the last year. More women are diagnosed with such psychological disorders than men. Why do you think that is? Is it that maybe in our cultural and societal norms say that it's more common or more thought highly upon for women to discuss and share their feelings and their emotions with others, and men aren't, and they're supposed to bottle it up? That could definitely be a reason why. So more women are more likely to seek help. It's not that women necessarily have more prevalence when it comes to psychological or mental disorders, but they just may seek help more, which leads to them getting diagnosed. There are also different disorders men and women are more likely to be diagnosed with, such as women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and men are more likely to be diagnosed with substance abuse and antisocial personality disorder. Another thing to keep in mind when thinking of psychological disorders are how relevant it is to the culture. So cultural relativism. This is the understanding that any individual's behavior or psychological symptoms must be evaluated in the context of their own culture. So if you think of, I think of some things that were culturally normal in some biblical times, like when people were very upset, maybe if someone died or a tragedy happened to them, they would tear their clothes. And that was not something that people looked upon weirdly. They didn't think, oh, that person's crazy or whatever. But now if someone gets upset and they're ripping their clothes off of them, like literally tearing their clothes to shreds, well, that would be seen as maybe something not acceptable. So that's one thing I think of, is you have to look at someone's behavior in context of their culture. Okay, so the medical model of in terms of looking at psychological disorders says that perspective suggests that physical and psychological disorders develop and should be treated in the same way. So if we look at psychological disorders in the same way as physical, we must look at what makes someone susceptible, what causes the initial cause, and then what keeps it going. So we have, according to the medical model, we have 3 causes of these psychological disorders if we're going to look at it the same way we would as physical disorders. So first, we have the predisposing cause. This is what makes someone susceptible. So focusing on the existing underlying factors that increase the susceptibility of developing a particular disorder. Is it environmental causes? Is it genetic causes? Or things that make you more susceptible? Is it some kind of event that happened to you? Next is the precipitating cause. This focuses on the events and the experience in daily life that may initiate the onset of a particular disorder. And then the perpetuating cause is what causes it to keep happening. So focuses on the consequences of the disorder that helps maintain psychological symptoms. So that is those three things: predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating are the 3 keys to the medical model whenever we're looking at psychological disorders. And then we have the biopsychosocial approach. And we talked about the biopsychosocial approach several chapters ago, but this in terms of psychological disorders. So this considers biological, psychological, and sociocultural factors when explaining causes for psychological disorders. So behavior, current behavior, and learned responses to sustain behavior. Cognitive, it's our thoughts and our beliefs. And then social, our social relationships, customs, and norms. So we see through our psychological aspect, thoughts and actions, lifestyle, stress, beliefs, sociocultural, cultural influences, family relationships, social support, and biological genetic predispositions, brain and other nervous system development. So all 3 of these things make up someone's likelihood or susceptibility to psychological disorders, and can be explanations as to why someone developed a psychological disorder. Okay, so the DSM-5, this is kind of the holy grail of learning about or diagnosing psychological disorders. So the DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition. This is the American Psychiatric Association's official guide for diagnosing mental or psychological disorders. So it breaks down different disorders into many categories. So we have psychological diagnoses. These assign a label to a person's psychological symptoms by identifying and classifying patterns of behavior. So based off of all the things that you are telling your counselor or therapist or whoever you're speaking to, whatever professional you're speaking to, based off of the list of symptoms you have, you can kind of fall in line with one or several disorders. So that'd be your diagnoses. Okay, next is the psychological prognoses. These are predictions about the typical course of the disease and the likelihood of recovery. Then it kind of breaks it down further. We have categorical information. This is a label reflecting membership to a particular diagnostic group. So we have diagnostic groups, which are like anxiety disorders, depression disorders, personality disorders, schizophrenic disorders, things like that. They're broken down into different groups, okay? And then last is dimensional, where the diagnosis lies on a spectrum of symptoms, such as the severity. Some people who have generalized anxiety disorder, they have it, they have it, but it's not necessarily debilitating. But then other people that have generalized anxiety disorder, it is so severe that they literally cannot leave their house and they cannot function, they cannot hold a job, nothing. So there's really a huge spectrum, a huge continuum on which symptomology lies. And so there's a huge range of severity and other dimensional information that can explain kind of where someone is in terms of a psychological disorder. Okay, so the first category or group of diagnoses we're going to get into are anxiety and anxiety-related disorders. So first, anxiety-related disorders are among the most commonly occurring psychological disorders. So the anxiety disorder is characterized by prolonged, uncontrollable, and sometimes vague feelings of worry or anxiety. Fear can lead to anxiety, and anxiety can lead to fear. Fear as a result of an indirect and unspecific threat. So you're more worried about what might happen rather than what is currently happening. You're not being faced with a direct threat. You're not being scared by something actively, but it's inactive. It's something that is indirect, and you're worried about what might happen. Okay, so underneath kind of all of our anxiety disorders, we have different disorders as well. We've got specific phobia. This is a persistent irrational fear of a specific object or situation. And I'm not saying it's dysfunctional to be afraid of something. Like some people are afraid of clowns, some people are afraid of thunderstorms, some people are afraid of spiders, snakes. But what makes it a specific phobia, what makes it dysfunctional, is if it affects your life, your day-to-day functioning, if it creates some kind of dysfunction in your life. So it's not like, okay, when a thunderstorm, a huge thunderstorm is coming through and you're scared in that moment because the lightning is striking near and the thunder's crashing really loud, and you're afraid that something might get struck by lightning, or a tree is going to fall down, or it's going to flood. That's normal. But if you see that a thunderstorm is in the forecast 6 days from now, and you're afraid to leave your house, even though right now it's sunny, because you're afraid of the storm that's coming in a week, now that is dysfunction. Okay. Social anxiety disorder is it falls under the category of anxiety disorders. This is marked and persistent fears of being scrutinized by others, embarrassed, or humiliated in a public setting. So you're afraid of what others think so much that you just don't want to go into public at all. That you're afraid of doing anything in front of anyone in fear that you will mess up and be ridiculed for it. Okay, panic attacks. Panic attacks are sudden episodes of intense fear accompanied with physiological symptoms, which often occur unexpectedly. Could be rapid breathing, chest tightening, feeling like you can't breathe, sweating, things like that. Panic attacks as the result of an event or out of the blue. So it can be either one. But panic attacks are not psychological disorders on their own. What makes them a disorder, which would be panic disorder, is when individuals experience recurrent panic attacks, some of which are unexpected, following by feelings of worry or dread about the potential of future panic attacks. So with someone with a panic disorder will change their behavior to prevent the events that cause the initial attack. So let's say you got your purse stolen from you walking to the store, okay? And so, and that caused a panic attack, okay? So to avoid walking down that street would be, a normal response, okay? That'd be on the mild side. That'd be a pretty normal response. Okay, I don't feel safe walking down that road anymore, so I'm not going to walk down that road anymore. But something that would cause even further dysfunction is if it got to a point where you're like, I can't even walk, I can't even go on walks anymore, or I can't go to grocery stores anymore. Things like that it becomes more and more severe in what behaviors you change in order to prevent future panic attacks. Another type of kind of a panic disorder. Some disorders can lead to agoraphobia. This is intense fear of being in a situation from which escape is difficult or impossible. So people will kind of remove themselves from situations because they're afraid of being out in the world. So a lot of people with agoraphobia, they just want to be left alone. They want to be at home alone because home feels safe and nowhere else feels safe. And so that's what agoraphobia is. Okay, next on to generalized anxiety disorder. So this is kind of the most common disorders under the umbrella of anxiety disorders that is diagnosed. So GAD, also known as generalized anxiety disorder, is intense psychological disorder involving uncontrollable worry and other cognitive and physiological symptoms. And then we have obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of OCD, and people will, kind of casually throw around the term, oh, I have OCD. But it's a lot more than just, wanting to keep things tidy or being kind of a neat freak about things or being very particular. It's a lot more to it than that. So I would be careful with throwing around the term OCD because it is a legitimate psychological disorder. It involves repeated and uncontrollable thoughts, images, or urges that are often followed by repetitive and ritualistic behaviors in an effort to reduce the anxiety brought about by the obsessions. So compulsions are triggered by obsessions. Obsessions are disturbing and intrusive thoughts, images, or urges that repeatedly interrupt a person's consciousness and cause anxiety. Then compulsions are repetitive and ritualistic behaviors, usually performed in response to the obsessions. So is you being a neat freak or being very particular about something truly OCD? Probably not. It's generally a lot more intense than that. Okay, another type of anxiety disorder is post-traumatic stress disorder. We first started learning about PTSD when seeing soldiers coming back from war because they underwent traumatic events. Very often they saw a lot of traumatic things. So it's psychological disorder that develops in response to a traumatic event. Development of fear, anxiety, and other symptoms in response to the memory of the traumatic experience. Okay. Then we have acute stress disorder. This is a lot like PTSD, but the guidelines are less rigid. So this is development of fear, anxiety, and other re-experiencing symptoms in response to a traumatic experience. Okay, that is all on anxiety disorders. Now on to depressive and bipolar disorders. So the reason why depression and bipolar disorder are in the same category is because depressive is actually called unipolar depression, and then bipolar is bipolar. So unipolar means that you're just stuck at one end of the spectrum, which is depression. Bipolar is you switch between the two poles. So we have mania and depression, and we'll get into what mania is here soon. So that's why they're in the same scope, in the same group of disorders, depressive and bipolar disorders. So first, the most common one that we hear of when we think of depression is major depressive disorder, also known as MDD. This is a psychological disorder involving either depressed mood or loss of interest in most activities. And this, you have to have it for more than 2 weeks. It's severe depression, and you also have to have there's a list of other symptoms that must occur, and you have to tick off the box of at least 4 of those, and has to be present for at least 2 weeks. But then even more severe is persistent depressive disorder, chronically depressed condition that lasts for at least 2 years for adults and 1 year for children. Okay, and then some women, the last person I heard that's kind of in the public eye, which some would say are celebrity, some would say, who is this? Some would say, this is not a celebrity, but Dixie D'Amelio, I recently saw on some new stuff coming out that she has PMDD, premenstrual, let's just say menstrual, not menstrual, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So this is a psychological disorder involving significant mood symptoms during the week leading up to the onset of menstruation in women. So significant mood swings. You feel like a different person, like she was dating someone And she would break up with him seemingly every cycle, without realizing the pattern that she was going through was PMDD. Was in the week leading up to her period starting, she would lash out at people, and she would like hate the people that she really loved, and would feel like a different person. And so that is a real thing for some women to experience, is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. That hormone shift that comes with the menstrual cycle can really cause some severe mood swings for some people. Okay, so when I talked about the two poles, so we talked about depression, and so we know what depression is. It's, feeling very low, feeling antisocial, feeling just, you're very down about pretty much everything, low motivation, low energy, fatigue, things like that. But on the opposite end of the spectrum is mania, or manic episodes. So mania are periods of euphoria, often accompanied by elevated self-esteem, increased talkativeness, enhanced energy, and decreased need for sleep. Well, doesn't this sound great? No, it often leads to impulsive behavior, risky behavior. A lot of people will overspend their money. They'll engage in risky and unsafe sex. They'll make impulsive decisions that are not good for them. So while it may seem, oh, well, they're not depressed, well, it's just as destructive to their lives as depression is. So it's too much. It's too far on the opposite end of the spectrum. So when we talk about bipolar disorder, there's two types. We have type 1 and type 2. Type 2 is on the next slide. Bipolar 1 disorder is a psychological disorder where individuals experience at least one manic episode, most alternating between periods of mania and major depression. And most manic episodes are followed by a depressive episode. And then we have hypomania. This is a milder form of mania that causes less severe mood elevations and does not interfere with normal daily functioning. And hypomania is a key part of bipolar 2 disorder, which is a psychological disorder where individuals experience at least one hypomanic episode and one major depressive episode. And because of this, doesn't it make it seem like bipolar 1 is less severe than or bipolar 1 is more severe than bipolar 2, because we have an actual like fully manic episode and a depressive episode. Hypomania is milder, so wouldn't bipolar 2 be less severe? No, that is not the case. Bipolar 2 sounds less severe, but it isn't. Bipolar 2 often is more, people with diagnosed with bipolar 2 are often more chronically ill. They have longer and more depressive episodes. They tend to be more impulsive, and there's an increased risk of suicide because of all of those factors. So bipolar 2 is typically a more severe diagnosis. So here we see depressive symptoms: suicidal thoughts, poor concentration, poor self-esteem, feelings of worthlessness or guilt, insomnia or hypersomnia, which is not getting any sleep or getting too much sleep, sad mood, lack of interest in normal activities, fatigue or loss of energy. Then manic symptoms are fast and pressured speech, so you're talking really fast, very happy, excited or euphoric, impulsive, risky behaviors, increased self-esteem, doesn't feel the need to sleep, racing thoughts and distracted, excessive energy, and increased activity and psychomotor agitation. So a lot of people who are depressed tend to engage in the cognitive triad, which is an explanation for mood disorders that include negative thinking about themselves, the world, and the future. And people that tend to engage in the cognitive triad, one of the negative thinking cycles, the negative thinking that this says, is called rumination. This is repeatedly thinking about the causes and consequences of a negative situation without engaging in any productive coping or problem solving. So that's, once again, that's rumination. You're ruminating on a negative situation that occurred, and you just it's like a vicious cycle. You just keep thinking on it and thinking on it and rehashing it without thinking of anything like there's nothing productive, nothing positive coming out of what you're doing. So you're just going into a downward spiral. So maybe a situation happened and you didn't react, or you didn't say what you wanted to have said. So you keep thinking about it and obsessing over it over and over and over without any kind of productive way to cope about it. You're just constantly hard on yourself and hard on yourself and hard on yourself. And that's what ruminating is. And that is often occurs when someone engages in the cognitive triad. Also, a lot of people engage in learned helplessness, the tendency to remain in a punishing situation because of a history of repeated failures to escape in the past. Okay, now on to another group of disorders: eating, somatic symptoms, and dissociative disorders. So first, we're going to talk about eating disorders. I do want to be extra cautious on this one because I know all of this can be triggering, but I just want to be a little extra delicate about these. Okay, so anorexia nervosa. This is an eating disorder where an individual purposefully loses weight to a point below which is considered healthy. So this is usually under eating. So a lot of times they don't have a correct self-image, and so they think of themselves as bigger than they are. So they don't see themselves as thin as they're becoming, and they don't realize that they are truly underweight and unhealthy. So they lose weight to a point below what is considered healthy. Then there's bulimia nervosa. This is an eating disorder characterized by recurrent episodes of binge eating and purging behaviors. So you're going to eat a lot, and then you feel guilty, and then you're going to throw it up because then you won't gain the weight from that. And then binge eating disorder is an eating disorder that involves recurrent episodes of binge eating without subsequent compensating behaviors. So this is not under eating. This is not purging the food. It can be sometimes you leave yourself too hungry and then you binge, but often it's a compulsion where often you're either by yourself, or you get into kind of a mood where you feel out of control and you just want to eat, and often followed by great feelings of guilt and regret and disgust with yourself is binge eating disorder. Somatic symptom disorder. This is a psychological disorder involving the combination of the presence of a physical symptom plus abnormal thoughts, feelings, or behaviors in response to the symptom. So one big thing about this is it's the feelings and abnormal thoughts that often occur with this are pain. This person feels great pain in whatever this physical symptom is, but according to medical doctors, whatever abnormal thoughts and feelings and behaviors they're feeling towards this physical symptom are often what makes it a disorder is that their abnormal thoughts, feelings, and behaviors towards this physical symptom is much higher, is much grander than what on paper it actually should be. So, maybe you broke a bone and you're in a cast and it's healing. And I'm not saying a broken bone doesn't hurt, but this person is just seething through the roof weeks later. But I have this broken bone and I just, I can't do it. I can't, say you broke your ulna in your arm, that's in your forearm. And weeks later, it's healing. You don't really wear a cast for all that long with a broken arm. Let's say, that person won't even move that arm at all. It's nothing with your shoulder is affected, nothing with your hand is affected. But they won't move that arm or that hand at all. They won't let anyone touch it. They are always seething in pain. They are obsessing over it. And so their behavior is looking weird, a lot more weird than any person that typically how someone typically acts when they break their arm. It's just above and beyond what is considered medically normal. That's somatic symptom disorder. But there is a physical symptom causing what is going on. But in conversion disorder, this is functional neurological symptom disorder. It's a psychological disorder characterized by the sudden temporary loss of a sensory or motor function. So unlike somatic symptom disorder, in conversion disorder, none of the physical causes can be medically explained. It is often it's often caused by a traumatic event, a traumatic psychological event. There was a group of women, a lot of women in, I believe, Cambodia, after some traumatic event happened to the country. I don't know if it's some kind of terrorist attack or what it was, but a lot of adult women became blind after that. And there was no medical reason or no medical explanation as to why, but that would be conversion disorder. Okay, that it's characterized by some kind of neurological change rather than a physical or physiological change. Okay, and then illness anxiety disorder. This is a psychological disorder which involves significant health anxiety and anxiety-related checking and avoidance behaviors. So when you hear of people who are hypochondriacs, they fall under the illness anxiety disorder. They often, they hear symptoms of a disease they've never heard of before, and they think, oh my gosh, I've got that. Okay, so it's someone that is constantly like overly health conscious, overly health anxious. And so they're always checking themselves and avoiding behaviors in order to prevent themselves from becoming ill. Okay, now on to dissociative disorders. This is still in the same group, okay? So dissociative disorders are a group of psychological disorders where the normal cognitive processes are fragmented, causing a sudden loss of memory or change in personality. So I'm going to talk about two types of dissociative disorders. The first is dissociative amnesia. This is a psychological disorder that causes sudden selective memory loss, which is usually precipitated by a traumatic event. So if you go through a traumatic event, it might be hard to recall events surrounding that time. And I'll give an example for myself. I believe I've got dissociative amnesia. So there was several months in my family's life that was very traumatic. That was very difficult. In October of 2008, I was 13 and my little brother was 10. Out of nowhere, we found out that he had a brain tumor, and we found out because he died. He unexpectedly died. He stopped breathing while he was taking a nap, and we turned him over and his face was turning blue, and he was dead before the ambulance even got to us. And we found it was because of a brain tumor on his cerebellum. And then a couple months later, so the day after Christmas, so that whole thing was traumatic in of itself. And then a couple months later, I was in middle school, but I tore my ACL playing basketball, so I had knee reconstruction surgery. And then my brother had shoulder surgery. Another brother had shoulder surgery and got the flu and pneumonia at once. So he got really sick, lost a bunch of weight. And then we moved. We moved to another state. We moved from South Carolina to Georgia. And another brother had a brain surgery, obviously different from a brain tumor, but still, kind of triggered some of that. And then my oldest brother, I've got a lot of siblings, my oldest brother deployed to Afghanistan for a year. And I'll tell you, my memory during those several months, very spotty. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of blurred together. There's a lot of stuff that I couldn't tell you. And I was 13. I was old enough to remember, things going on. But even in my mid-teens, not very far removed from that time period, I couldn't remember. So I believe that I had dissociative amnesia, something, selective memory loss usually precipitated by a traumatic event. It's almost like your brain trying to protect itself from the trauma you underwent. And then next is dissociative identity disorder, also known as DID. So this is a psychological disorder where a person experiences two or more, sometimes vastly different personalities. DID is typically accompanied by extensive memory impairment and amnesia as periods of time another personality was quote unquote out. You won't have multiple personalities at one time. They'll kind of take turns as being the one presenting itself. And so the other ones that are kind of in the background, when they resurface, they may have memory impairment or amnesia as to what occurred during the time that another personality was presenting. Okay, now on to schizophrenia. Schizophrenia involves psychosis, which is characterized by delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thinking, abnormal movements, and lack of motivation and emotional expression. So there's two different types of symptoms that people diagnosed with schizophrenia have. They have positive symptoms, which are pathological excess or additions to normal functions, such as delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized thinking and speech. But then there's also negative symptoms. This is a pathological deficit. So pathological excess, so something is added to what's normal, and then pathological deficit, that's taken away from what's normal. So, or the absence of emotions or behaviors that are typically present in a psychologically healthy individual. So, a delusion is a fixed and rigid false belief. Okay, so you have this idea that someone is out to get you, or that there's some kind of conspiracy or whatever it is. It's fixed and rigid. You don't stray from that belief, but it's not true. Okay, so that is a delusion. Then a hallucination is a positive symptom of schizophrenia that involves false sensory perceptions. You might hear or see or feel something that's not there. Disorganized thinking and speech is where individuals may think or speak in ways that are jumbled, illogical, or incoherent. People diagnosed with schizophrenia may also experience catatonia, that should say catatonia, which is abnormal movement behavior, abnormal motor behavior. And then a type of catatonia that some may experience is called catatonic stupor, an extreme form of catatonia that involves paralysis. Okay, so when we talked about here, the top up here, delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thinking and speech, and catatonia, all of these are positive. These are positive symptoms. So these are excess or additions to normal functions. Now down here, the 5 A's of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia are alogia. This is without speech. Avolition. This is without motivation. Anhedonia. That is without fun. Affect. This is without emotional expression. And then asociality, without interests in social situations. And this can present, so all of this together can present initially as depression. So once you say someone that doesn't, want to speak much to people, someone without any motivation, someone that is not having fun, even if they force themselves to go do something fun, they still don't enjoy it. Someone without much emotional expression, and someone without interest in social situations. Doesn't that sound kind of textbook depression? So people with schizophrenia can often initially be diagnosed with depression and not schizophrenia. According to the diathesis stress model, this is a model for explaining schizophrenia that suggests that the disorder develops from a genetic predisposition that interacts with emotional or environmental stress. So it's a combination of what your parents and grandparents, what was genetically passed down to you, and the stressors that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. Okay, and then the last group that we're going to talk about is personality disorders. A personality disorder is a long-standing, rigid, and maladaptive patterns of behavior that make it difficult for individuals to sustain healthy social relationships. And they're broken down into 3 groups. So personality disorders are almost always beginning in adolescence or early adulthood, but usually aren't diagnosed for years later. And these people often see their life's problems as everyone else's fault. So we're going to break down these three groups of personality disorders. The first, which are odd or eccentric behaviors, those are paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal personality disorder. And then dramatic or impulsive behaviors, that would be antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, which we'll kind of break down a little bit more, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of. And then lastly, the anxious or fearful behaviors would be avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So borderline personality disorder is a dramatic and erratic emotions and behaviors that often include self-harming behavior. So the three I's of borderline personality disorder are instability in relationships, identity disturbance, such as poor self-image, and impulsive behaviors. So that was just one of them to kind of break down. All right, that is the end of chapter 15. And now I want to talk about a bonus point opportunity that will add bonus points onto your final exam grade. And you will have to email me anytime before the exam starts. Not before you start it, but the exam will be opened Thursday at 5 p.m. Okay, email me before then. Okay, this opportunity, it'll be up to 10 points as extra points on your final exam grade. I want you to email me what your favorite thing you learned was this semester and why. And I want you to go into some detail. I mean, I'm not saying you have to write a full page or anything, but probably several sentences. I want to hear from you. And because I don't want to hear you say personality disorders because I thought they were cool. No, I want to know what you learned about that you enjoyed and honestly why you enjoyed it. Maybe it was the way it was presented. Maybe it was because it had some personal relevance to you. Maybe it intrigued, piqued some interest, something that you may want to study in the future, whatever that is. But I'd like to hear from you what your favorite thing you learned this semester was in this class. It has to be in this class. And I need you to email me before the final starts, before it's posted. Okay, so you have some time to think on it and to do it, but don't forget to do it. I want everyone to earn some bonus points. Okay, that was the end of general psychology, and good luck on the final.